This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast. Hey, School Success Makers. Today, we're joined by my new friend Cameron Smith, who runs a private independent school in the great city of Chicago. We go over their challenges, what's going good, and all of that stuff, and it's a good one. So please enjoy this next episode of the School Success Podcast. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater, joined by a new friend out of the great city of Chicago, Illinois, Cameron Smith, who is the co-founder and CEO of Bennett Day School there in, of course, Chicago, Illinois. They're doing some awesome things, K through 12, and I don't want to steal any of his thunder, so I'm going to pass it off to him to introduce himself. So, Cameron, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Mitchell. Thanks for having me on the podcast. It was nice of you to reach out. You're right. I'm the co-founder of Bennett Day School. We're a school focused on dynamic, project-based learning. It was kind of school I wanted for my family and for my kids, and that it didn't find existed. And so here I am almost a decade later with a school pre-K through 12th grade and over 300 kids.
Dang, it's doing good then, huh?
We're doing okay. I come from humble beginnings, though, and a child of a school teacher and a locomotive engineer, and who knew I'd go into education like my mom. So it's been very fulfilling.
That's awesome, man. I love it. Well, before we dive into the nitty gritty, I always like to start off the podcast with, hey, you're from Chicago. If I ever was to visit you in Chicago, what are we going to do for fun? What's going to be something that's like, oh, you got to do this when you come to Chicago?
Oh man. Well, the school, I should say, I mean, I live in an area called Logan Square that's wonderful where it meets Humboldt Park. There's a great trail called the 606 Trail where you can bike and jog and really get back and forth between a bunch of neighborhoods. It's great Rails to Trails project. But if we were downtown closer to school, we're in an area of the West Loop called Fulton Market. And Fulton Market is just booming. So there's some of the normal things that people, they want to go to a Cubs game or whatever it might be, see the Bean in Millennium Park. But I would say, let's go for a walk in Fulton Market. Lots of pedestrian only streets and so many great restaurants, just lots of people out. I think there's more outdoor dining in Chicago than almost any other city in the US. Now it's seasonal, but I'd say come visit in the spring and the summer as well. But Fulton Market is home to not just Bennett Day School, but Google's Midwest headquarters, McDonald's worldwide headquarters. There's just a lot going on. So I'd say we'd walk around Fulton Market.
All right. And you got a Chicago style hot dog or something from Portillo's or something, right?
You can. I mean, you can. You could also do deep dish pizza and all the things that people think of normally, but we like to take the road less taken.
Well, being in Chicago, does that mean you're automatically Bears, Bulls, Cubs, Blackhawks, all those, sports teams?
They're second in my heart. I grew up outside of the Detroit area, suburb, and so I'm a big Detroit sports fan for sure.
Okay.
I do love Chicago sports as well, just as long as they're not playing Detroit.
Okay. It's only twice a year for the Bears and Lions, so it happens. And I grew up a Chicago Bears fan. My dad's from Chicago area, from Lake in the Hills. It's where my grandfather still lives. And so I need to come visit him. So then if I'm up in Chicago, I'll have to swing by and do the market that you just mentioned and all that.
Yeah,
so
and come visit us at Bennett as well, of course.
Okay, I'd love to. Well, diving into some of the nitty gritty, I love to ask the school leaders some challenges. I love to hear some of the challenges you guys are up against, but obviously it can be kind of boring just talking about challenges, but also how are you combating those challenges that you guys have come up against there at Bennett?
Yeah, sure. I mean, by school standards, we're still a fairly new school, some would say. We're a decade old. But so the idea that your children and that students pre-K through even 12th grade learn best through project-based hands-on learning, that's not how we all traditionally went to school. We all sat in this, or I'll speak for myself at least, sat in a desk, you're in desks and rows, neatly organized. And that model is really outdated to prepare our kids for the next century. so much of what we do is being automated. I mean, really, what makes us human and what's left of that, the ability to collaborate, to be innovative, to work without, those are things that can't be automated or done by computers in the same way when we think about human ingenuity. So now that's unfamiliar to a parent maybe, but that model from sit in desks and rows and information in one ear and out the other that's now in your pocket on your smartphone, it's just not what our kids need. And so getting parents and families comfortable with, I know this is what's right for my kids, but some of it still feels a little unfamiliar to me, it has become less and less of a challenge over the years. And I think on the flip side of that, to answer your question, this will be the first year that we graduate the kids to college, which is pretty exciting. So we'll have 12th graders going on to college, and they've already done amazing summer programs and won numerous competitions amongst other high school students in Chicago and nationally and internationally. So I'm confident they're going to go to great schools. But I think that'll put a lot of parents' minds at ease, if you will, that I know this is the right thing to do for my kids, but we're an independent school, it's tuition based. And so it's a big investment in your kids. And so ultimately, you want to know that the outcomes, however you measure it, and for many, that's what happens next after kids are at your independent school and after they're at Bennett. So that's one of the major challenges. And one on the other side of it, I'm going to keep going with some other ones because
Yeah,
there can be a
that was
list. But
that's a good one. I'm glad you shared that because I that's a legitimate challenge that you guys are up against. But it sounds like you are combating it very, very well. So like, let's keep it going. What's some other ones you can think of?
sure, I mean, I won't spend a ton of time on. I can think of at least two more, but there's rising cost of everything and an inflation or stagflation or potential recession type environment. Pay for teachers is up dramatically, and that's important to retain your best teachers and your talent. Your assets go home at night. Your people. You can build a beautiful building, but what goes on inside between the teachers and students is what's most important. So those costs are up, but you just need to plan accordingly for that. But everybody's dealing with that, so I wasn't going to spend too much time on that one. We have noticed there hasn't been a great learning management system for what we want to do. And when we document project-based learning, it's via what we would call, it's competency-based. And so this also goes to 100 years of just giving students letter grades is really empty of any type of feedback or any recognition of whether you mastered whatever subject it was that you were exploring. Were you compliant with what your teacher wanted? Did you do extra credit? Like, how did you get that grade? So you can have letter grading, you can have standards-based grading, which is meeting or exceeding certain standards. But then you have competency-based grading, where there's a feedback loop with your teachers and you keep going so you reach depth and mastery in given topical areas. And so we're developing our own learning management system. And we also believe if we can improve what we do at Bennett, to the extent we can share that with other schools who are also interested in competency-based education and project-based learning and how to best document it, that's something we're working on. So we're excited to share some of those kind of resources as we develop them to help us deliver great experience at Bennett, our own community.
Awesome. Do you guys want to expand and grow the initial campus or have multi campuses? Is that kind of the vision and goal?
It's a great question, Mitchell. Private school and a private company. I'm really proud of that. We know it's a big investment for our families to come to Bennett, no matter what their financial commitment is to the school. So we have a very robust grant and scholarship program. So we have families that are sometimes very surprised that they may think that they wouldn't qualify for a little bit of help and just basically reduced tuition to come to school. And we do that for them. But then it's up and down the spectrum of people who can afford to pay for a few kids to come to Bennett, or those who might only pay a couple $100 or a couple $1,000 for an entire year, which is well below our cost. So we're growing this first campus with over 300 students now. Will probably be twice as big as that when all the grades are fully built out. We are adding a wing. We're adding a new wing to the school, which will add a high school dimension gym and some underground parking, which in Chicago people are very excited about, but additional labs and classrooms. And so we'll be working on that. This will now be our fourth. Yeah, this will be our fourth construction project. They've all been on time, on budget. And so we've allowed nearly twice as much time for this project, just given supply chain issues and whatever else might come our way. But I really appreciate, we'll build this first campus and make sure we're fully built out here before we build another Bennett someday. We do get asked that question a lot. We're really happy to host other educators and to go visit others. Like a lot of us weren't able to do the last 2 to 3 years, either to host or to go visit others, because we learned so much either by having visitors or going to see other schools. And we like to share what we do with others. It helps us do what we do better too. So we'll do some of that first, I think, before we maybe go build another Bennett somewhere
Yeah.
else. One thing, one decade at a time.
So with the current building, you're able to grow to 600 before you would need to ever add on or move to another building?
We wouldn't ever, I don't see any need ever to move this campus. This will be the third phase, expanding this current campus in downtown Chicago in the Fulton Market area of the West Loop that I described to you. So the current campus is about 50,000 square feet, and it'll be nearly double that size.
Wow.
So I don't think we'll have to go anywhere, at least in Chicago, for the foreseeable future, which will be good after, about a decade of construction projects.
Oh, yeah, that's exciting. Well, congratulations on the expansion and the growth you guys have had in this decade. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Wishing you guys more and more growth as you grow, of course.
Thank you.
Perfect segue into the next part. So we talk about some challenges. I'd love to hear what's going really, really good. So give me a chance to brag about Bennett and what you guys are doing, and just kind of like toot your own horn a little bit. What's going on there?
Well, it's kind of you to provide that opportunity. I mean, I'd say even from our inception with only, a couple dozen kids to now over 300, I think there clearly was a need that we saw that's been proven out for a school that understands. Many schools may say they all do something very similar, like missions and visions all sound very much the same about preparing global citizens for, an unknown future. But when you walk into Bennett, either as a parent or a visitor, and you walk around, you understand very quickly that, wow, this school is doing something that's seems very purposeful and intentional. You don't see worksheets, you see organic student work on the wall. You see students and teachers collaborating. You see them using and reusing numerous materials, and you see them traveling all around, whether it's walking or taking the bus around our city and using the city as a classroom. So I'd say even in recent time, everything I just described has been a breath of fresh air to get back to after 2 to 3 years of interrupted learning, if you will. But if history is any predictor of the future, that we also found that hands-on project-based learning, it really leads to better outcomes. And even if you looked at it no further than the children and students at Bennett, and I can speak to this as a parent as well, are intrinsically motivated to learn. They want to learn. And whatever environment they have been in, whether it's on a field trip or at school, or they happen to have been at home, or they're at home in the summer, that they're motivated to learn. They like to learn, as opposed to the extrinsic, like, you have to do this because we gave you homework or there's a grade attached to it. There's a public display of work for the kids at any age. We call it Harvest Fest or Demo Night, depending on their level of maturity. We've also found that public display of work and sharing what you've learned with others who you care about really pushes you and those who you work with to deliver. If you know something, you can teach somebody else about it. You really know the material. So our students can retain and apply over 3/4 of what they learn. And I'll say what else is working well attached to that. There's a survey you may be familiar with called Challenge Success, which surveys middle and high school students nationally. And most middle and high school students say the top 3 words they use to describe school is tired, bored, and stressed. That's what kids say. Sometimes it sounds familiar to you, but our kids, when you survey them, they say things like engaged, excited,
Mm.
Purposeful, meaningful. And then they're outscoring by a wide margin national standards on, our kids are now for the first time taking, SAT, ACT, and outscoring national averages by wide margins. So they like going to school, they have purpose, they know why they're doing, and the results are showing that. So I'd say that's working pretty well.
That's awesome. And that one's my favorite one so far of attesting to that, is asking the students just that and getting their opinion. I know that I was interviewing somebody else and they were talking about the things that come up in from the 70s, 80s, when people were asking like the issues that teachers have with students, and it was like chewing gum and running in the hall and all these things that they were up against then. But then now it's like the things that kids are up against and battling now that you guys are going to have to instill in them, or to to prepare them for? I mean, I guess not even I'll segue it into a question. Like, how are you guys kind of navigating that? I know there's some hot topic stuff going on in schools and everything. How do you guys navigate that?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, where to start? I mean, it could be, social media usage, bullying. I mean, social emotional learning is part and parcel to what we do. I mean, we'll document cognitive learning, social emotional, physical, linguistic. We look at different domains of learning, and social emotional is one of them that we pay particular attention to, but none of these are ever in a vacuum. So they're all linked. Just like when we have project-based learning, if we use a Singapore-based math curriculum, for example, because Singapore scores in the top of the world in math. And so one of the ways, and I promise I'm answering your question, or I'll try. As a parent, I thought at first that I wanted I'm going back more than 10 years now, but I wanted a Montessori school for my kids. But then I discovered the Reggio Emilia approach, which was developed also in Italy about 50 years after Italy, post-World War II, when Reggio Emilia, in a town in Tuscany, they're rebuilding their village, and they say, never again do we want our kids not to know why they're doing what they're doing, and so we want them to help build the environment around them. Whereas in Montessori, there are these beautiful materials that you rotate through using. It's very similar. The rods or beautiful pink blocks that you might use, for example, in any Montessori environment. But if you want the kids to always know why they're doing what they're doing and help build the environment around them, I became really enamored with the Reggio Emilia approach. And that really lends well to project-based learning and to developing depth and mastery. They're using our Singapore-based math program to depth and mastery with fewer subjects in any given year, as opposed to most systems of math used in our country, at least, that are sort of inch deep, mile wide, if you will, and don't build a depth of mastery. But in the Reggio Emilia approach, the relationship between the school, the environment, and the home is very important, incredibly important. The environment is referred to as a third teacher around you. So like we're using the city as a classroom with all the wonderful resources like downtown Chicago, but also that link to the household is key. So parent communication and engagement at school is very important. So it's our family association and how parents get involved in building our community. The 3 to 4 times that parents are in for parent guardian teacher conferences. And as students get older from middle through high school, they're also documenting. We provide a digital portfolio of our children's work, which we found to also be increasingly important when you're applying to college, to show what gives you purpose as opposed to just test scores and grades. So we use all those different, ways to be engaged at school, and what we do, and what we provide as we document the competency-based learning in the digital portfolio. It all goes hand in hand. So communication, a way to sum it up, to just be purposeful and methodical about communication at home, at school. And then it's been nice. We've been able to get back to like parent education series because everyone wants to know just some more basic things like, when does my kid get a smartphone? How do you set up controls on it? Are they allowed to have devices in their bedroom after a certain hour? And I would say, at least if the ship hasn't sailed yet, to not have my 2 cents would be not to have devices allowed at meals ever, and not after a certain time at night. And there are these wonderful, Wi-Fi controls and things where you can just shut it off for your family. And it's good for yourself too, frankly. But I digress.
Man, I love it. I love that the hands-on approach and learning, like you just mentioned, where like, hey, this is how can I actually apply this to my life and use it? I feel like that's the best way of learning. Because I know when I was I was homeschooled my whole life. So when I was doing algebra 1, I was like, all right, I can do this. It was kind of fun. And then I got into calculus later in the high school, and I hated it. And I was like, I was like, how am I ever going to use this? And what I want to do? Until my mom brought out the consumer math book, and she's like, here. We can do taxes, checkbook, whatever. And I was like, I love this. And it clicked because I was like, I can use this. I can apply it right now. So I love any of that stuff you can do. So I love that you guys are doing that at Bennett for application type learning. Is that something you have to, when you bring in teachers, that you have to teach them that way? Or do you look for that specifically when you're hiring them to say, hey, this is how we do project-based learning, or how we do these?
Yeah, great question, Mitchell. I mean, because project-based learning has grown in its application and popularity, like George Lucas has dedicated a great deal of his philanthropic outlets to his educational foundation, has written extensively about the benefits of project-based learning. especially the efficacy of it for underserved communities and students. But it takes all students from, I know we're on a podcast, but if I'm saying we take all students from wherever they start and raises them up another level, if you will. And so when we interview teachers, there are increasingly a number who've had experience in a project-based learning environment, but also, we like to ask some key questions, or I'll say it the other way. We'll say, do you have any questions for us? And then, if one of the questions is like, well, where is the content guide for the year? And then that's kind of like for us, that means it's probably not a good fit. Like we have a developmental map, which shows the developmental and cognitive milestones that all the students should be reaching. There are nearly 200 competencies that our students have to reach in high school to get a diploma from us. Like, can you form and prove or disprove a hypothesis? Like, that's something you have to know how to do before you graduate from Bennett. And that tells you something different than whether you got an A in physics. Like, that is a competency you had to demonstrate to get a competency-based grade and feedback and be assessed at Bennett, for example. But so if teachers are asking about where's the content guide, we'll say, well, you kind of need to change the content to reach the cognitive goal. Like, to figure out what topic, because subject matter, there's some things you definitely have to memorize, and you have to internalize, I'll say, math that are math and science oriented for sure, or grammar oriented, let's say, for example, just rules you have to know. But you have to be able to change and weave. A good example would be, this past year, middle schoolers. So there's a different topic every trimester for project-based learning, and the teachers might have a topic in mind where they could see how it resonates with students and then see where the students want to take that. And so puzzles and games was a topic for middle school, for example. For this trimester, let's explore puzzles and games. So they were laser cutting and 3D printing, different puzzles that they had made. But then some students had said, hey, we went to an escape room recently. And so the kids were designing different escape rooms, and there were 2 or 3 different tracks that you could go through. And then in one of our maker spaces, we call tinkering and engineering science labs, or test lab for short, but we have 3 of those maker spaces at school, one for early childhood, and then first graders through, call it middle schoolers, and then 8th grade through high school with overhead power and things like that. But they took some of the work they were doing both in project-based learning and some of the work they're doing in geometry, where they literally built a, like you mentioned the 70s and 80s. I was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s, but like an old school arcade game, they had built a case for it. And then they had so they had to know geometry to build all the angles for the case. And then they just had a, like a regular old screen, but they had used, microbit and microchip controllers and use some different programming languages they know to program games. And so one of the ways you would do escape one of their escape rooms in an arcade case that they had built and designed and had their games in it, you had to beat one of their games to escape escape room. So like, kids will remember how they applied the Singapore-based math or the collaborative skills that they had to use, or the computer programming that they had to actually practice there. And so then whether it's a standardized test or the next time they're asked even in a college class to apply something they've learned, that's kind of how it works at Bennett. John Dewey, credited with being the parent of progressive education, if you will, said, education isn't practice for real life, it is real life. And so we try to bring that to bear at Bennett with that, at least with that. That's one example.
I love that, because it just makes sense when you mention all that. That's literally the only thing I can think of is that just makes sense. We should be teaching them that way, that based on that way of like preparing them for things that they're going to come in contact with. What are some of those, the biggest ones there at Bennett, or the most popular ones? Are like, hey, we have kids, the students really love like this project that we do. Again, it could be any grade, but is there one that stands out that's like the most popular?
I mean, I think it's just that we make time for them to have project-based learning every day. And I think it's just that time that often is an open-ended, like they have to, I remember in school being told exactly what I was supposed to do. I mean, like, here are the instructions, or here's the report you have to have, or here's the test and you have to study for. And here it might be, I don't know, like another one I think of is, hey, we think it's important because it's in our own city, and the Reggio Emilia approach, you learn from the environment and thus the city around you, there's some areas of Chicago that are underserved for access to fresh food in our food deserts. So we need to learn about that. What can we do, even as young people? What can we do to combat that? Because that's important to us in our city around us. We had middle schoolers who were doing fundraising for the Greater Chicago Food Depository, raising significant funding there, even a couple $100 for a couple kids who are like, 10, 11 years old is amazing. But, really impacted dramatically doing that at a young age. And now and they're thinking, what else they might want to do or who they might tell about what they've done, whether that's in a college essay or just for the rest of their lives. I mean, that one really sticks out to me as well. I think of even our youngest kids who have also, I think it's incumbent upon the teachers sometimes, and this is a classic example for us, but it was years ago. It's a good one though. So a teacher can either look for compliance or look for an opportunity sometimes, and it depends on what it is, but in terms of classroom management. But like a 3-year-old is squeezing an orange, into their glass, and it's like you could be like, "Stop! You're making a mess," or you could say, "Is this a teachable moment?" And sure enough, it was like, "Why are you doing that?" And they're like, "No, well, I'm curious how you make orange juice." And so that led to like a 4 to 6 week exploration of all the different ways you could make orange juice, how do oranges grow. You could think about teaching, 3-year-olds, how do you measure the distance around an orange? Does it matter how big they are? And like, so you can figure out the content to deliver the cognitive goal. Because you imagine having a worksheet, and first of all, I don't know who would give a 3-year-old a worksheet, but you could just imagine it was like, we need to learn how to measure the distance around a sphere, and here's the worksheet. You wouldn't know why you were doing it. Or you could be like, I'm really interested in how to make orange juice, and like, doesn't matter how big it is around the orange, or like how much juice we're gonna get. Is the orange that's twice as big around as the other one, like how much juice do we get out of that? And so then when we come back to maybe a Singapore-based math goal around like, area circumference and volume, and they're like, oh yeah, remember that thing we did in third grade with orange juice? So what we do with training our teachers to look for those teachable moments, I think is pretty special as well. Just another one that sticks out. I mean, I think I've covered some middle school examples, early childhood. I mean, the high school kids were high school students were incredibly interested in the history of why so many neighborhoods may be gentrified, various neighborhoods of Chicago. And so they literally built a table that was like a model of the city of Chicago and 3D printed a number of the different items that they wanted to put on their map. And then imagine learning social studies that way and then having to share it with your friends and your colleagues. They had another project about the democratic and the justice system. And so that one sticks out. That was this past year where we had like a producer from a crime drama come in to school. We had 3 FBI officers come into school. And so the high school students just got to ask people like all the questions they had about what do you do for a living? What's your job like? What's hard about it? And so again, you could read a couple chapters from a book, about how the justice system works, how the court system works in our country, or you could like ask some people. Yeah. And it's a great way to learn. And so the direction that took was just incredibly special based on the engagement of the kids at the time.
Man, I totally agree with that, because when I learn more from when I talk to people like me, just listening to you for 30 minutes or whatever, I've already learned a ton. I love what you guys are doing there at Bennett, but I know like my wife will always tell me, she used to give me a hard time about it, but now she gets it's who I am, and it's a good thing, because we first got married 9 years ago, she'd be like, you ask so many questions to people when you meet them. And I was like, I want to get to know them. Like, I want to know what they do. Because I literally could meet somebody, they could say, oh, I work at McDonald's doing fries or something. And I would 100% be like, oh man, like, where did the fries come from? Like, how long do they fry for? What oil do you guys use? Like, I'm that type of person, because I really am curious to know about all these different things. That's how I learn. And then I remember it typically when I talk to the person the next time.
I mean, we're on the same page there for sure, Mitchell. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen Ken Robinson's TED Talk, on how schools kill creativity, but it was inspirational when I was starting Bennett. I was starting Bennett Day School. I think it might now be the #1 watched TED Talk of all time, actually.
Really?
So you can watch him give the live talk. Yeah. Or, there's some fun, like animated versions of it, but he basically basically shows that like schools typically kill creativity and kids stop asking questions by the time they're in third grade. It's like, all right, it's time to get real. Got to prepare for those standardized tests to do school the way it's been done for 150 years, even though it's outdated, but the infrastructure's still there. So that's what schools have traditionally done. And we don't want that to happen to kids. And colleges and universities have finally, I think, woken up to it too. Not all of them, but now whether it's test optional or grade optional, or you can provide a portfolio of your work. That's why we have a digital portfolio at Bennett. It's called the consortium. There's a consortium of schools that were started by Ivy League schools, Stanford, U of C, Northwestern, and now it's hundreds of schools. And they essentially take a digital locker, a digital portfolio of your work, because they know that when they get 40,000 applicants and 8,000 of them have the same test score and GPA already, they're like, yeah, still enough to tell them apart. So I think now, yeah, we want our kids to know why they're doing what they're doing. We also want them to be able to demonstrate why they have purpose and how they can add value to a community, whether it's, college, job, work, or otherwise, wherever life takes them.
Man, that's exciting. That's so cool. Well, I think it's the perfect segue into, as we slowly wrap it up. I always end with one of the main questions, which is,
Okay.
you've been doing this for a while now. So if you were to give a piece of advice or wisdom to a school leader who's tuning in and listening, what would that piece of advice or wisdom be?
I would say, if there's something you want to do, talk to as many people who've been down that same path before you as you can before you go down, the path yourself. And every journey is going to be different or otherwise, but I'd say start small, prove whatever it is you want to do first, and then you can always grow it bigger. I remember I'm starting Bennett even looking for a campus, like we're going from 50 to 100,000 square feet. And at first I thought I'll just sign a lease for 50,000 square feet. And that was when people were like, so, okay, so it's an idea. Okay, great. So, that probably took more time than it needed to, but then started small in a 5,000 square foot space, just enough room for 4 classrooms, proved what we could do, and then got a bigger space. But that's just one example of, I don't know how many chapters the book would be. I wrote like, how to start a school, what to do, what not to do. But I guess in my own advice I provided, I'm always happy to talk to other school leaders. I'm deeply, deeply thankful for, hire and partner with people around you who know more than you do about the areas where you have holes in your own background or knowledge. Like, I'm the child of an educator and was fortunate to be an investor and financial supporter in and around the education space before starting Bennett. So I could be a really, really motivated parent and a professional manager of the organization, but I'm deeply thankful for the educators who I've worked with over the years and work with now. So it's my job to help try to make their job easier, in the background, if you will. So I'd say don't be afraid to partner with folks who, also know more than you. They can really complement your own skill set, whatever that might be.
Solid. I love it. Well, Cameron, thank you for taking time out of your day to hop on the podcast. I know you're busy. I know it's right now as we're recording this middle of the summer. So just thank you so much for taking the time to do that, and wishing you and Bennett nothing but the best, as you guys have decades more of pouring into the next generation. And I can tell and see that you have a love and a heart for all this next generation. So please keep doing what you're doing, because you're doing awesome at it. So thank you.
Thanks, Mitchell. Thanks for having me on, and happy to host you and go for that walk in Fulton Market anytime and to show you around Bennett Day School.
Let's do it.
Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Cameron for taking time and being on the podcast today. I love what he's doing over at Bennett Day School, and I'm wishing them nothing but the best as they continue to grow and educate the next generation that's coming behind us. And if you're a school that's listening today and you have empty seats at your school that you need to fill to bring in more revenue for your school, or you're finding ways to just get more leads, or just have your school not be the best kept secret anymore in your area, we can help you, and we'd love to help you. So please find us online. Our website is schoolsuccessmakers.com. That's schoolsuccessmakers.com. Or maybe you're more of a Facebook user. Totally fine. Please join and check out our private Facebook group just for school leaders called School Success Makers. That's School Success Makers, a private group just on Facebook for school leaders. And maybe you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you have some ideas for guests that we should interview on here or different content matters that you'd like to hear. Please let us know that as well. You can reach out to me personally if you'd like on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. You can find my account, Mitchell Slater, on there. Or, again, send us a message through our website. We'd love to get some feedback as well as a 5-star review. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, we'd love some great feedback from you guys. It helps us be able to put out more amazing, great content with these great school leaders that we've been interviewing. We'll be here next week, as always, with another amazing guest on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.